The class of 1999 vanished on their graduation trip. 22 years later, a chilling discovery resurfaces. There were no headlines that morning. No sirens. No calls. Just birdsong outside an open kitchen window and the slow, deliberate footsteps of a woman moving through her house like a ghost in her own story. Elaine Mercer lit the stove with a match. She always did it that way, never replaced the broken igniter. Her hands moved with practiced care, scooping 2 spoonfuls of instant coffee into the chipped mug that said, "World's #1 grad mom." The mug was 22 years old. She never drank from anything else. Today was June 10th. Every year, the town of Monroe grew quieter on that date. Some people avoided eye contact. Others left flowers at the high school gates. But most had learned how to forget out loud. Elaine never forgot. She sat at the kitchen table, facing the road like always, staring down the stretch of cracked asphalt where a charter bus had once pulled away with 21 kids inside, including her son, Daniel. It never came back. The morning news droned softly from the living room. She kept the volume low, just enough to make the silence feel less personal. Then it happened. A voice on the radio, not a local one, but clipped and professional. Authorities are responding to reports of a large vehicle unearthed near Bitterleaf Ridge, a remote forest tract roughly 20 miles outside Monroe, where heavy rains caused soil erosion late last week. Elaine's hand stopped halfway to her lips. Sources close to the scene suggest the vehicle may match the dimensions of a 1999 charter bus. She stood, the mug tipped, spilling coffee across the old table, staining the edges of a faded permission slip she had never thrown away. She drove before she could talk herself out of it. The old station wagon grumbled in protest, but she ignored the rattles. She took the back roads, past the broken billboards still advertising Monroe High Seniors, class of '99, with peeling paint and torn edges. The trees thickened, the sky dimmed, and then flashing lights, sheriff vehicles, park rangers, a single white tent with plastic tables. And beyond them, something massive, sunken into the earth like a wound reopened. Elaine stopped at the rope line. A deputy approached, his voice cautious. "This area's restricted, ma'am." But Sheriff Mara Tilton, older now, weathered by years that hadn't been kind, stepped forward. She looked at Elaine, and something in her face faltered. "You should come with me," she said softly. No one argued. The bus was barely a bus anymore. Its roof had caved in, windows shattered. The once white paint had gone green and gray, moss climbing over the sides like vines reclaiming what didn't belong. But the number on the side was still visible. Monroe 249. Elaine dropped to her knees. She hadn't seen that number in 22 years, but it had lived in her dreams every night since. Sheriff Tilton crouched beside her. "There's something inside," she said quietly. "I need you to prepare yourself." Elaine didn't ask what. She didn't have to, because she already knew. Somewhere behind the metal and rot, beneath rusted seats and broken glass, her son's voice had been waiting for someone to finally come back. Elaine followed the sheriff down a narrow path cut through dense brush. The earth was soft beneath her feet, damp from the previous week's storm that had unearthed what the forest had kept hidden for over 2 decades. Sheriff Tilton held back the last veil of low-hanging branches, revealing the bus in its entirety. It had slumped sideways into the earth, one side swallowed nearly to the windows. Moss clung to the frame, vines threaded through shattered glass. And yet, it was unmistakable. The faded letters Monroe 249 curved around the top of the windshield. The last place 21 teenagers had ever been seen. A forensics team moved quietly, reverently. Elaine watched them extract fragments from the wreckage. Shreds of canvas backpacks, what looked like a melted Walkman. A single dusty sneaker with neon laces still knotted. Someone held up a leather wallet, opened it, and revealed a senior portrait, laminated and cracked. Elaine didn't need to get closer to know the face in that photo. It was Sarah Jensen, her son's closest friend, the girl who used to wait with him on the porch after school. both of them holding popsicles like fragile treasures. Sheriff Tilton stood beside her, hands clasped behind her back. "We didn't expect to find anything intact," she said. "But the soil, it sealed it in." Elaine didn't respond. She was staring at the bus windows, or what remained of them, because just inside, pressed into rust and spiderwebs, were scratches, marks, letters, carved into metal by desperate hands. They let her step inside. The floor was half collapsed, and the air smelled of rust and rot and something colder, something that didn't belong to time or decay. Elaine moved slowly, gripping the edge of each seat, until she reached the third row on the left. There, carved into the frame with something jagged, were names: Sarah, Marcus, Lily, Trent, Daniel. Her hand hovered over the last one. Daniel, not etched neatly, but frantic, multiple times, as if trying not to forget it, as if afraid it would disappear. And beneath the names, one word scratched over and over: below. Below? Elaine turned. A young forensic analyst stepped forward. "We're not sure what it means, but look, there's a trail behind the wreck. Erosion pulled back some of the hillside, and we found a cavity. A sinkhole, most likely. Possibly a cave." Elaine's breath hitched. "You think they went underground?" The woman nodded slowly. "Or were taken." Later that day, search crews began probing the earth behind the wreckage. It didn't take long. Just beyond the tangled roots and muddy incline, the earth dipped suddenly, sharply, and at the bottom, hidden under layers of moss and collapsed stone, was the black mouth of a cave, a natural corridor wide enough for someone to fall into or be led inside. By nightfall, the sheriff's department had cordoned off the area. Floodlights bathed the trees in sterile white as specialists arrived with ropes, masks, cameras, and gloves. Elaine sat in the back of her station wagon, watching the lights blink in the forest like fireflies. She didn't sleep. She wouldn't, not now, because somewhere beneath this mountain, a piece of the past had waited, frozen, buried, and now, after 22 years, it was calling up through the dirt, begging to be seen. Morning came slowly, filtered through gray clouds that sat heavy above the treetops. The camp near the sinkhole buzzed with tension. Quiet words, rustling gear, radios cracking static. Elaine stood near the edge, flanked by forest rangers and a rescue team prepping to descend. Sheriff Tilton approached, helmet under one arm, face drawn with sleep deprivation and something deeper, fear shaped like duty. "You don't have to stay for this," she told Elaine. But Elaine only shook her head. "I stayed 22 years. I'm not leaving now." The cave was narrower than expected. Its mouth opened into a throat of jagged limestone and sharp, crumbling edges, descending in uneven slopes that swallowed sound. Every step echoed. The lead caver, a man named Kellen, wore a camera on his helmet. Sheriff Tilton watched from the monitors just outside the perimeter tent. At 40 feet, the team found the first clue. A shoe, half-rotted, canvas torn. Its seams held together by time and soil, but the initials still barely visible on the inside lining. MJ. Marcus Jennings. One of the 21. Sheriff Tilton radioed for a pause. The team marked the location, took samples, and continued. Deeper in, the cave widened. A pocket chamber opened, its walls blackened with old soot. Someone had built fires here. Remnants of blankets, a broken flashlight, candy wrappers brittle and faded, and more names, scrawled in charcoal on the walls. Some full, some only initials, but all real, all theirs. Elaine sat outside the tent, watching the feed from Kellen's camera. Her hands never stopped moving, wringing, clasping, unfolding the same tissue over and over. Then Kellen's voice broke through the static. "I've got something else." Everyone stopped moving. The camera panned down. A narrow crevice split the chamber wall. Inside it, bones. Multiple sets. Piled, half-buried under collapsed rock. A silence fell over the entire field. Not even the trees moved. Later that afternoon, they retrieved what they could. 6 partial skeletons. 3 confirmed by dental records. Sarah, Trent, Lily. Sheriff Tilton took the news like a stone across the chest. Quiet, breathless. Elaine, hearing the names, folded in her chair. Not from pain but from finality. Even when she rose again, her voice was quiet. Were they together? Yes, Tilton said. And Daniel? The sheriff looked away. We're still looking. That evening, a second team was sent deeper, with better lights, new gear, and they found it. Another passage, collapsed but navigable, and tucked against the wall, wedged between broken stalagmites and a rusted canteen. A camcorder, plastic, scorched on one side, but intact. Kellen turned it over, clicked the playback button. The screen buzzed, and then a face appeared. Teenage boy, sweaty, shaking, crouched in darkness, whispering, "If anyone finds this, please don't stop. We're still here." I think Daniel went deeper. I heard him last night. I heard his voice. The image jerked. The camera tumbled. Darkness. Then only the sound of breathing. And something else. A faint voice in the distance. Crying. Repeating one word. Over. And over. Below. Back at the surface. Elaine gripped the sides of the monitor like a lifeline. She leaned in, close enough to see the reflection of panic in the boy's eyes, to hear the plea buried in that whisper. And she said, barely audible, "He was calling for help." Sheriff Tilton nodded once. "And now we know where to look next." They mapped the route, marked every crevice, prepared a third team, and before they descended again, Elaine placed her hand on the damp stone and closed her eyes. She didn't say a prayer. She said a name, Daniel, and this time, she swore, he would not be left behind. The third descent began at dawn. The crew moved in silence, equipment strapped tightly, helmets lit with LED beams that cut narrow tunnels through the dark. Sheriff Tilton went with them this time. She'd insisted, not because she didn't trust her team, but because she owed them, the kids, the families, something more than oversight. She owed them her presence. The crevice from the video led deeper than any of the previous chambers. The passage sloped at a punishing angle, forcing the team to crawl. The walls narrowed, pressing in with ancient pressure, like the cave itself was reluctant to give up its secrets. 30 feet in, the air shifted, fresher, cooler, and then the space opened. A natural cathedral, dome-shaped, the ceiling lost in shadows. Sheriff Tilton whispered into the radio, "We found something." The chamber was littered with debris, personal items mostly rusted beyond recognition. Scraps of backpacks, school IDs with names rubbed off, a tarnished bracelet. And in the center, a ring of stones. Within the circle, burned bones. Melted plastic, a shattered camcorder lens. Sheriff Tilton dropped to one knee. "This was where they stayed," she said softly, "or where they tried to survive." Elaine watched the feed from above ground. Her fingers dug into her sleeves as she saw what the cave revealed. But it wasn't until the fourth camera, positioned on the far right wall, caught the doorway that she stood from her chair. A narrow gap, half covered by rockfall, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. And carved into the stone just beside it, in long, deep scratches, "Daniel went through." Sheriff Tilton radioed to her team. "Start clearing." Took hours. They moved slowly, conscious of collapses. Every stone was lifted with care. And finally, when the opening was wide enough, Kellen slipped through first. His light vanished into the dark. Then his voice returned, tight, disbelieving. "You're going to want to see this." The others followed, and what they found stopped them cold. It was a room, not natural, built. Wooden beams reinforced the walls. Metal lockers, ancient, rusted, lined one side, and in the center a bed frame. Rotting mattress, molded sheets, a child's drawing pinned to the wall above it. It was of a house, a woman, a boy, a dog, written in red crayon, "Mom, me, home."
No bones.
But something better. A photo, cracked, folded, preserved inside a plastic sleeve. A senior portrait of Daniel Mercer. On the back, scrawled in faded ink. "If you find this, I stayed alive." Sheriff Tilton's voice cracked over the radio. "He made it. He made it farther than the others." Elaine covered her mouth. Tears spilled without sound. They searched the entire chamber. No remains, but signs of someone who lived for a time. A hand-dug latrine. A water collection system fashioned from old canisters. Scratches on the wall counting. Something. 37 marks. Then none. And then, tucked behind a loose board, a notebook, mostly destroyed, but a few pages remained. Written in uneven handwriting, shaky, desperate, but coherent. "Daniels. I can hear them at night. I think I'm the last one. I wrote this for her, so she knows I didn't forget. I'll try to climb out tomorrow." And the last legible line, "Tell her I didn't give up." Elaine collapsed into the chair outside the tent. The sun was setting. Her hands pressed to her chest. Sheriff Tilton emerged minutes later, dirt-streaked, helmet in hand, and knelt beside her. She didn't say anything at first. She just reached out and placed the photo in Elaine's lap. Daniel, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in 22 years. Whole, alive, remembered. Elaine looked at the drawing next. The house, the word Mom, and in that moment she understood. He had survived for her, held on for her, and now she would carry him the rest of the way. The town of Monroe didn't breathe for 3 days. News of the discovery spread slowly at first, then all at once, across state lines, then national broadcasts. Reporters swarmed the sheriff's department. Helicopters hovered above the forest like vultures circling truth. But Monroe wasn't a town that liked attention, especially not the kind that came wrapped in old tragedy. The mayor gave a brief statement. "We ask for space and respect. These were our children, and now they're coming home." But the town didn't need a press release to start remembering. They began quietly, candles on porches, ribbons tied to mailboxes, the faded class banner, once an eyesore on the school's south fence, was pulled down, cleaned, and hung in the community center with care. Elaine sat at her kitchen table, the same one that had held her grief for over 2 decades. But now, in the center of it, lay 2 objects: Daniel's drawing, and the recovered notebook, pages too fragile to handle. She read them once, no more. Any more would feel like asking too much of a boy who had already given everything. She stared at the lines he'd written in darkness. The way the words narrowed near the end, as if he had run out of time. Or hope, but never her name. He wrote Mom, every page, like a lighthouse he couldn't stop sailing toward. Sheriff Tilton arrived late that afternoon. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, holding a small, plastic evidence bag. Inside, a charm bracelet, Elaine's, given to Daniel the night before he left. "Found it wrapped around the bedpost," the sheriff said. Elaine held it gently. One of the charms, a tiny silver book, was bent. Inside, engraved in tiny lettering, "You are my story." The funeral wasn't like the others Monroe had known. There were no coffins, no bodies for Daniel or the others still lost in the deeper reaches of the cave. But there were names, and people ready, after 22 years, to say them aloud without shame. Each family stepped forward. Each read a letter, a memory, a song. Elaine stood last. She didn't bring paper. She didn't bring tears. She brought Daniel's drawing. She held it up. "This," she said, "is the last thing my son made." Her voice didn't tremble. "He didn't die afraid. He died remembering who he was, who we were." And then she said something no one expected. "I forgive whoever did this." A silence fell. Not disbelief, but awe, because forgiveness, in a town built on grief, sounded louder than revenge. That evening, the vigil carried into the streets. One by one, neighbors lit lanterns and set them into the dark water of Birch Lake. Each flame drifted out like a soul given permission to let go. Elaine stayed until the last one disappeared into the horizon. She whispered into the night, "You stayed alive for me." Then, quieter, "I'll live the rest for you. Back home." She opened Daniel's yearbook for the first time in years. The pages smelled like dust and ink and something older, something sacred. She flipped to his photo. Not the Daniel of the cave, but the Daniel before. A crooked smile. Freckles. A tie that wouldn't sit straight. She traced his face with her finger. And then she wrote in the margin beside his name, "Found. 22 years later. Never forgotten. Never left." Outside, the porch light flickered once, then held steady. Sheriff Tilton didn't sleep much after the vigil. The case file, once closed, then cold, then buried under decades of unanswered questions, now sat on her kitchen table, swollen with new evidence. She flipped through the pages long after the town had gone to bed. The recovered camcorder, the notebook, the carved word, below, and the newest piece of the puzzle, a map, hand-drawn, folded inside a notebook belonging to one of the boys, Marcus Jennings. It showed a detour, not the route the bus was supposed to take, but one that cut through unpaved Forest Service roads, ending at a crude X. The X sat squarely over Bitterleaf Ridge, where the bus had been found. The next morning, Tilton called Elaine. "Do you remember who organized the trip back then?" Elaine blinked. "The school district. Mr. Devins. He was the assistant principal. He coordinated everything." "Did he go with them?" Elaine shook her head slowly. "No." Said he had a back injury. Sent a substitute chaperone. "Young guy. I didn't recognize him." Tilton made a note. "What was the driver's name?" "Frank Tuller. But I never met him. I was told he worked for Golden Trail Transport." The sheriff stared at the name. "I checked their logs. They never had a Frank Tuller." Elaine froze. "What do you mean?" Tilton sighed. "I mean the bus wasn't driven by who we thought. And it wasn't hired by the company the school claimed to use." Back at the station, Tilton reopened the personnel files. Mr. Devins had resigned in 2001. Moved out of state. No forwarding address. But a trail of payments, large ones, made to a private account in his name showed up months after the disappearance. And one of the recipients, a man named Clive Weller, known alias Frank Tuller. The paper trail was thin, but damning. Clive had no commercial driver's license, no school vetting, no reason to be behind the wheel of a bus carrying 21 students. But he'd been there, and then he vanished. No tax records, no property ownership. Just one fingerprint match from an arrest in 1986 for wire fraud, and a known associate of a shell company that once operated logging roads near Bitterleaf Ridge. Sheriff Tilton exhaled sharply. "Daniel wasn't just lost," she said aloud. "They were taken." She brought the findings to Elaine personally, sat across from her at the kitchen table and laid it all out. The fake driver, the falsified trip route, the unexplained payments. Elaine listened in silence, then leaned forward. "You think someone meant for them to disappear?" Tilton hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think it was orchestrated, and I think it went wrong." Elaine closed her eyes. "In all these years, I never let myself imagine it was evil, that it was more than just a crash, a tragedy, a cruel twist of fate." She opened them again. "But you're telling me someone planned it. I'm telling you someone profited from it." The sheriff's voice was low, firm. "We think the bus was supposed to be stripped, sold off. The kids may be meant to be left in the wilderness, maybe rescued later, maybe not. But the cave-in, the sinkhole, that wasn't part of the plan." Elaine felt cold all over. "So they were buried because someone didn't come back. Because someone chose not to." That night, the sky above Monroe was clear for the first time in weeks. Elaine stood on her porch, staring at the stars. Each one looked like a name, like a memory not yet spoken. And somewhere out there, a man named Clive Weller, Frank Tuller, still breathed the same air as her. But she didn't feel rage. Not yet. She felt something worse. A question. How many more were there? And who else had helped him disappear them? The next day, Sheriff Tilton made a call she had avoided for over 2 decades. It rang 6 times before a voice answered. Deep, groggy, guarded. "Weller." She took a breath. Clive. Silence. Then, more cautious. Who is this? Tilton didn't blink. Sheriff Mara Tilton. Monroe County. More silence. Then a click. She dialed again. This time it went straight to voicemail. She didn't leave one. She already had what she needed. A voice print and a location ping from the call. He was still in Oregon. Coastal town. Living under a different name, Lyle Tunnell. Sheriff Tilton contacted the state authorities. Within 24 hours, a quiet surveillance team was posted outside a modest rental house on a dead-end street. Inside, a man in his 70s. Graying beard, heavy limp, living off retirement checks and disappearing into a daily routine of groceries, library visits, and long walks at dusk. A ghost, living free. Meanwhile, Elaine was sorting through Daniel's storage box again. One she had hidden in the attic just after he disappeared. Inside were school drawings, crumpled notes, a broken wristwatch. She hadn't touched the contents in years. And buried beneath the clutter, an envelope, unopened, postmarked June 9, 1999, the day before the trip. It was addressed to her. Her hand trembled as she slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. Hey Mom, just wanted to say thanks for everything. I know I don't say it enough. I'm excited for this trip. We're finally out. Me and Sarah are gonna sit in the back and sneak candy, I bet. Don't worry. I packed the peanut bars you like. Maybe I'll bring one back. Love you. D. Elaine stared at the page for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't cry. Not this time. This wasn't goodbye. It was proof. Proof that he had gone out into the world with light in his heart. And that someone had tried to steal it. Sheriff Tilton called that afternoon. They're picking him up, she said. Tomorrow morning. Quietly. Elaine paused. Can I be there? Tilton didn't hesitate. Yes. The drive to the coast was quiet. Elaine didn't ask what she would say. She didn't know. But she wore the bracelet Daniel left behind. And in her jacket pocket, his letter. The arrest happened in the early morning fog. Weller didn't resist. Didn't speak. He stood in his doorway in a faded cardigan and nodded as the officers read him his rights. Elaine sat in an unmarked car across the street, watching. Her hand gripped the door handle. Then let go. At the station, Tilton met him face to face. He looked tired, old, but there was something else in his eyes. A flicker. Recognition. Sheriff, he said softly. It was never supposed to happen like that. Tilton didn't reply. She placed a single photo on the table. Daniel, smiling in his senior portrait. You buried this. Weller looked down. His mouth twitched. Then he said, almost inaudibly, I left the engine running. He talked for 6 hours. A tangled confession of desperation, manipulation, and greed. He'd been hired by a contractor. Promised a payout for rerouting the bus through Bitterleaf Ridge where arrangements had been made. He didn't ask questions. Didn't care. Just followed orders. Until the road gave out beneath the tires. And the cave took them. He ran. Changed his name. And for 22 years not a single soul came looking. Elaine didn't ask to face him. She didn't need to, because now she had answers. And the only person she wanted to speak to was already gone. But that night, back in Monroe, she sat beside Daniel's drawing and whispered, They found him. She touched the crayon smile, the stick figure arms. And I hope wherever you are. You know he didn't win. Outside, the wind rose. And through the window, the red maple tree they had planted years ago shook gently. Its branches like reaching hands, waving in the dusk. Elaine leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for bad news. She was listening for silence, and finding it full. The courtroom was hushed when Clive Weller entered, flanked by deputies. Elaine sat in the gallery's second row, a place she'd imagined for years but never truly believed she'd see. Her hands rested in her lap, steady now, the letter from Daniel folded like armor in her pocket. Weller didn't look at her, didn't look at anyone. just kept his head down as the charges were read. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, negligent homicide, destruction of evidence, obstruction of justice. 21 counts. Each name echoed through the room like a drumbeat. Each one a life taken, a future buried. When the judge asked how he pled, Weller said, "Guilty." A murmur moved through the crowd, not in shock, but in something closer to disbelief. He didn't contest, didn't stall, didn't even explain. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters surged forward. Elaine ignored them. She walked to the edge of the courthouse lawn, where a row of photographs had been set on display, one for each student. A temporary memorial. She paused in front of Daniel's. Same photo, that smile, the crooked collar. A handwritten note was tucked into the frame. "We never forgot you, Danny. S.J. Sarah Jensen, his friend. Recovered, buried, remembered." Elaine touched the glass gently, as if smoothing his hair one more time. Back home, a letter was waiting in the mailbox, postmarked from out of state. No return name. Inside, a single photo. Grainy, faded. It showed a camp, tents, a fire, a group of teens sitting in a circle. The back read, "They weren't the first. Check 1995. Sierra Valley." Elaine brought it straight to Tilton. The sheriff read it once, then again. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over," she said. Within a week, Tilton reopened an old cold case from another town. Another school trip that had gone missing. Another transport van that crashed en route to a retreat. It had been dismissed as an accident. Until now. In Monroe, the community began healing in small, almost invisible ways. The high school rebuilt the senior wall, this time with 22 names. The 21 who vanished. And one blank space. For the student whose body was never recovered. For Daniel, Elaine was offered the chance to speak at the dedication ceremony. She stood under an overcast sky. The town gathered before her like a congregation of old wounds. "I used to think time would take the pain," she said. "But it doesn't. What it does give is a way to carry it." She held up Daniel's drawing. "It gives us the power to tell their story the right way. Not as a mystery, not as a legend, but as truth." She looked at the students gathered, today's seniors. "If someone ever tells you to stop asking questions, keep asking." She left the stage to applause, but she didn't feel triumphant. She felt quiet, like the forest after a storm. Still damp, still broken, but alive. That evening, Sheriff Tilton stopped by the house. She held a file in her hand, marked with red tape. Elaine opened the door before she knocked. "You were right," Tilton said. "There's more." Elaine nodded. She didn't need to ask what came next, because she already knew. There were more children out there. More mothers with porch lights still on. More names carved into stone, or still echoing through the dark. And it was time to bring them home. Daniel had survived longer than anyone knew. Long enough to leave a message. Long enough to leave proof. And in doing so, he'd not only saved himself, but opened the door for others to be found. That was his legacy. Not the silence, but the sound of footsteps walking back toward the light. The file Sheriff Tilton handed Elaine contained a single photograph and a typed report. Case number 178V. Sierra Valley, 1995. Vanished. 6 students and 1 adult chaperone. Destination: nature retreat 3 days. Outcome: never arrived. Declared: vehicular accident. Bodies unrecovered. Closure: assumed drowning. Elaine scanned the report, then reread it. She didn't speak right away, but something in her eyes changed. A sharper clarity. A bone-deep recognition. "It's the same pattern," she finally said. "Different year, different names, but the same silence." Sheriff Tilton nodded. Whoever started this didn't just get lucky with Monroe. They were practicing. Elaine set the report down. And someone's still helping them. Over the next 2 weeks, the sheriff's office, alongside the newly formed Federal Joint Recovery Task Force, began digging. Literally, A team was dispatched to Sierra Valley. They scoured old park maps, ranger logs, vehicle manifests, anything that might hint at the route taken. And there it was again, a reroute, an unlisted side road, marked as impassable after a storm, never reopened, never investigated. And along it, miles in, another sinkhole, another void. This time they didn't bring cameras. They brought cadaver dogs. And in less than 4 hours, the dogs alerted. Beneath a collapsed stretch of earth, searchers recovered fragments of a van chassis, riddled with rust and charred in places. Inside, a student ID, name Kendrick Miles, Sierra High, class of '95. And next to it, scratched into the van wall like a scream trapped in steel, "We heard them coming." Back in Monroe, Elaine and Tilton sat side by side in the station. "We're not looking at isolated incidents anymore," Tilton said. "We're looking at a pattern, an organized disappearance effort." Elaine was quiet. Then, not just disappearance, erasure. They wanted to make sure no one asked the right questions. And they almost pulled it off. That night, Elaine wrote something new. Not for Daniel, not for herself, but for the families of the Sierra Valley Six. Your silence is not your fault. And if no one came for you before, someone is now. She posted it online, under the title, "To the Mothers with Porch Lights Still On." It spread fast, too fast. Within days, she was flooded with messages. Dozens of parents, former students, strangers who remembered odd reroutes, mysterious substitute drivers, trips cut short or never begun. Elaine forwarded every message to Tilton. The names were no longer scattered stars. They were forming constellations. The investigation reached national headlines by mid-month. A Senate subcommittee launched a review of charter transport companies and private school trip contractors dating back 30 years. The Monroe case, long considered a tragic anomaly, was now the centerpiece of a larger reckoning. Elaine declined interviews. She didn't need airtime. She needed action. Sheriff Tilton gave a press conference. Calm, measured, but clear. "We now believe that what happened to the Monroe class of '99 was part of a coordinated pattern of abductions and cover-ups stretching across at least 3 decades. We are working to identify not only the perpetrators, but those who looked the other way." And in the background always was Daniel. His notebook now digitized and archived. His drawing reproduced on posters for the task force. His name spoken in Congress. Elaine never sought credit. But one morning she received a package. Inside a frame, a photo of the Monroe Memorial Wall, and a note written in trembling pen. "I never knew where my daughter went, until I saw your story. Thank you for keeping the light on for all of them. B. Holden, Sierra Valley **. Elaine held the photo to her chest, and whispered, "We're not done yet. Because some stories don't stop at closure. Some stories carry forward." And every mother who waited in the dark now had someone walking beside her. Not as a rescuer, but as a witness. And a promise. You were right to hope. Elaine began keeping a new journal. Not just letters to Daniel, but to the others. To the ones still waiting in silence. To the ones whose stories hadn't yet surfaced. She called it the Porch Light Ledger. Each page bore a date, a name, and one question. If they had made it home, who would they have become? It was more than grief. It was resistance. A refusal to let time erase them twice. Sheriff Tilton read from the ledger during her briefings now. One name at a time. One memory. One child. Because this was no longer just a case, it was a reckoning. And it needed to be spoken into being. Then came the call from Arizona. A woman named Layla Grant had seen the press conference. She said her younger brother vanished in 1992 on a high school geology trip. They were headed to a cave system that was later closed due to flooding. No one ever looked for the vehicle. His name was Eli Grant, and she had one item left from him. A map he had drawn in his notebook. She mailed it to Monroe. Elaine opened the envelope herself, and on the map, at the bottom margin, were 3 words in shaky pen. "Not where we're going." Tilton looked at the ink. The date, the route. "Same pattern," she said. Same detour, same silence. Another field team was mobilized. Another search. And this time they brought a name in advance. Eli. At the sight, the pattern repeated itself like a haunting refrain. Vehicle fragments, charred remnants, personal effects, and something new. A rusted toolbox buried beneath the soil. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were dozens of ID cards. Different schools, different states, years apart, each one tagged with initials on the back. Likely aliases. One card in particular stopped everyone cold. Daniel Mercer's. Except it wasn't his school. It wasn't his photo. Just his name. Elaine saw it later that night. She turned the card over. On the back, someone had written, "This one was smart. Had to change him." Changed the case again. Because now, they weren't just looking at abductions. They were looking at identity harvesting. Tilton briefed the DOJ the next morning. "This wasn't random," she said. "These children weren't just removed. They were used. Their names, their lives, their digital footprints. Someone was building new people from stolen roots." The theory wasn't new, but now they had proof. Elaine didn't sleep that night. She sat in Daniel's room, still frozen in time, the books neatly shelved, the bed untouched. She looked at the window and whispered, "They tried to erase you." She gripped his drawing, "Mom, me, home." But they failed, because Daniel hadn't just survived. He'd resisted. He'd documented. He had known someone would come looking. That weekend, a memorial fundraiser was held in Monroe, not for a statue, but to fund forensic DNA testing for unidentified remains across state lines. They called it the Below Project, named after the word Daniel had carved again and again into the bus wall. It raised $400,000 in 2 days. Elaine stood quietly in the back. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because the world was speaking now. And it was saying his name, Daniel, not forgotten, not erased, but remembered into action. Winter came early that year. Monroe's streets glazed with frost, and the trees stood skeletal, leafless, like memory itself, bare but unyielding. The town moved slower, quieter, as if processing the weight of all it had learned. Elaine kept her routines, but something in her had shifted. It wasn't peace, but it was something like purpose. One morning, she received a knock at the door. Not a reporter, not a neighbor. It was Mara Tilton, and her eyes were different, not tired, focused. She stepped inside, removed her gloves, and placed a small file on the kitchen table. Elaine didn't touch it. Not yet. "What is it?" Tilton's voice was steady. "The full picture." Inside were photocopies, documents pried loose from old sealed archives, anonymous tips, and subpoenaed contractor records. Names, dates, companies that no longer existed or had morphed into something untraceable. And in the center of it all, a network, a loose web of front operations, transportation providers, trip facilitators, outdoor education groups that popped up for 2 years and disappeared just as quickly. They had fingerprints across 11 disappearances between 1985 and 2007. And every one of them followed the same script. Rural school, low-budget trip, alternate driver, due to last-minute change. No trace. Until Monroe cracked it open. Elaine's fingers brushed over one name in particular. Kindred Pines Nature Services. Filed in 1998. Dissolved in 2001. They'd organized the Monroe graduation trip. It was right there, hidden in paperwork, given credibility by the school's trust. "What did they gain from this?" she asked. Tilton exhaled. "Hard to say. Some children had insurance policies taken out. Others had their identities hijacked, used to create fake accounts. We're still unraveling it." Elaine shook her head. "It wasn't about them. Not really." Tilton looked at her. "No," she said softly. "It was about what they could be turned into." By that evening, Elaine sat down to write again. But this time she wrote a letter. "To Daniel, you gave us more than a message. You gave us momentum. You made the world stop pretending. She paused, then continued, I don't know what happens next, but I know that somewhere out there, there's another boy waiting to be found. And we'll keep going step by step until the last name is called. The DOJ released a statement the following week. The Below project had matched 3 sets of remains to long-missing students from different states. One from Arkansas, one from Nevada, one from West Virginia. Their families had waited over 30 years. Elaine was asked to speak on behalf of the coalition. She agreed. She stood in front of a podium in Washington, D.C.
No teleprompter.
Just her voice, and the sound of snow falling soft against glass behind her. She held up Daniel's drawing. This is why we look, she said, because someone, somewhere, is still scratching their name into the dark, hoping we'll see it. Afterward, a woman approached her, mid-50s, nervous smile, a necklace that trembled as she walked. My son disappeared in '89, she said. Elaine took her hand. What was his name? Jeremy. Elaine nodded once. Then we'll add him to the wall. The wall. What had once been a classroom mural in Monroe was now digital living. The wall below. An online archive tracking every cold case with a matching pattern. One central hub. Built on Daniel's name. By people who refused to forget. Elaine visited it every morning. A ritual. Promise. She would scroll through the list. Not to count the losses, but to remember the faces. And for each one, she whispered the same words. You're not alone anymore. Because Monroe had woken the world. And Daniel had carved the map. All they had to do now was keep walking into the dark, torch in hand, name by name, until the silence was full of voices again. Spring thawed the edges of Monroe. The snow receded, revealing earth softened by time and footsteps. Grass returned to the schoolyard, and tulips, planted by volunteers around the memorial wall, began to push up in gentle defiance. Elaine walked there most mornings, not to mourn, but to witness. One morning, a young girl stood by the wall, 6th grade, maybe 7th. She traced the engraved names with her finger, one by one, carefully. Elaine approached quietly. The girl turned. You knew Daniel, right? Elaine nodded. He was my son. The girl looked back at the wall. I think about them a lot, she said. We talk about them in class now. Not just the vanishing, but who they were. Elaine smiled. Good. That matters. The girl hesitated, then asked, Do you think they were scared? Elaine's voice was soft. I think they were brave. Brave enough to hold on to hope. Brave enough to leave a trail. At home, she opened a new envelope from the task force. A report, another ID match, another name, and beside it a small photo. Boy, 17, freckles. Smile not unlike Daniel's. His name was Luis Ortega, missing since 1994. His mother had died in 2009, but a cousin had never stopped submitting DNA. It had finally matched. Elaine folded the letter slowly, then added his name to the porch light ledger. Later, she joined Tilton at the Monroe Community Center for the first meeting of a new local program. Voices, volunteer outreach for investigating cold evidence and survivors. Dozens of people came, some who had lost, some who had searched, some who had simply decided enough was enough. Elaine took the podium last. She didn't speak long, just held up Daniel's notebook. Sometimes, she said, the loudest voice is the one that's still scribbling in the dark. She paused. And sometimes all we need to do is listen. After the meeting, a man in a wheelchair rolled forward. Vietnam Viet. Quiet eyes. He wore a worn ball cap with a faded pin. Truth Lives. He handed her a folder. My niece, Kayla. She vanished in '97. No one believed me, but I read your work, and I think she's part of it. Elaine accepted the file. I'll look into it. He gripped her hand. I know you will. That night, she lit a candle in her front window, not because Daniel was still missing, but because someone else's child still was. On her porch, she sat with a notebook, A fresh page. At the top, she wrote, Kayla Ward, 1997, Louisiana, summer camp disappearance. She didn't know what the end of the page would hold, but she knew how to begin. With a name. Meanwhile, Sheriff Tilton had begun working with federal agents on the Below Network, a nickname for the emerging suspect web. They had identified 4 former transport coordinators linked to now-defunct companies across the country. 2 had died. 1 was in hiding, and 1, Marlon Dell, was still operating. Tilton found him in Texas, running a business under a new name, Bright Range Outdoor Youth Programs. She went with federal agents. They raided the office. Inside, they found files. Dozens. All recent. And 1 folder labeled Spring Route 2023. A list of rural schools, itineraries, assigned drivers. And at the bottom of the folder, alias Frank Tuller. Elaine heard the news the next day. She said only 1 word. Again. And then she stood. Because it wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It never had been. It was about the entire machine. And if it was still turning, she would help bring it to a stop. With truth. With light. With every name that still echoed through the cave. In the weeks that followed, the task force moved fast. They issued indictments. They froze bank accounts tied to shell nonprofits. They subpoenaed school district records across 6 states, focusing on any past affiliation with Bright Range and its predecessor entities. Sheriff Tilton worked nonstop. She testified before Congress, her voice calm but unwavering. These weren't accidents. These were engineered disappearances. And for years, they hid behind nature, negligence, and red tape. Her words lit fires. Parents came forward. Former employees. Even a driver. Aged now, guilt-ridden. Who admitted he'd once delivered a bus of students to a rest stop and was told to leave before they even got off. He was paid in cash. Never asked why. But the names haunted him. Elaine's ledger grew. So did her circle. She hosted quiet gatherings. Grieving families, former investigators, counselors. They shared names, dates, traces. Each entry a flicker of resistance against the long shadow of erasure. And slowly, quietly, a movement formed. They called themselves the Below Watch. Not activists. Not vigilantes. Just witnesses. Guardians of memory. Proof that some people pay attention and won't stop. One morning, Elaine received a call from a woman named Terry from Ohio. Her daughter, Marianne, had vanished in 2003 during a choir retreat. Everyone thought she ran away, Terry said, voice cracking. They said she was troubled. But I knew. Elaine asked the same question she always did now. Did she draw? There was a pause. Yes. Why? Check her journals, Elaine said gently. Look for symbols. Words like below. Marks. Scratches. She might have left a map. Terry called back that evening, crying. She had found a notebook. In the final pages, Marianne had written, If this book is found, I didn't run. Please, Mom, don't stop looking. They said we'd get a new name. But I don't want a new name. I want you. Elaine didn't sleep that night. She sat at her window, light glowing softly. A signal. A vigil. Meanwhile, the prosecution against Marlon Dell moved forward. He refused to testify. But digital forensics didn't need his words. The files recovered from his drives contained everything. Alternate route maps. Payment receipts to contract drivers. Student profiles listing age, vulnerabilities, and family situations.
Disposition code.
Some profiles were marked reclaimed. Others, successful transfer. And a few, chillingly labeled unrecoverable. Daniel's name was there, flagged as delayed in the 1999 log. And next to it, note left behind. Potential contamination risk. Avoid retrieval. Elaine read the document. Her hands shook. Not from fear but fury. They hadn't just taken him. They'd written him off. Like inventory. Like waste. The next day, she visited the cave again. The entrance had been sealed for safety, but the town had erected a memorial at the trailhead. a black stone arch with 21 stars carved into its curve. And beneath, one line etched in silver. We saw them. We heard them. We will not forget them. Elaine knelt in the grass, laid a hand on the cool metal, and whispered, "They tried to erase you." Pause. But the world remembers now. As spring melted into summer, Monroe changed. The silence didn't go away, but it softened. It became something else. Not absence, but presence. Memory made visible. And a name, Daniel, became a starting point, not an end. Elaine planted wildflowers around the red maple, every color Daniel had liked. She labeled each one with a small white flag. Each flag bore a name, and one word beneath, returned. The national investigation swelled. What began as a single cold case now spanned decades, connecting schools, ghost nonprofits, and nearly 80 missing children, all with similar patterns. The task force called it the Echo Web, a system of silences and substitutions so well orchestrated that most of the country never noticed the cracks. But now every detail was unraveling. Elaine watched from Monroe, not as a bystander, as a cornerstone. When she was invited to testify before a federal oversight committee, she wore Daniel's bracelet. She didn't bring a speech. She brought the drawing. She held it up and said, "This was my son's last message. He didn't just want to survive, he wanted to come home. And for every child like him, we have a responsibility. Not to believe what's convenient, but to question what's forgotten." The room went silent, not out of politeness, but recognition. Her words made the evening news, but she didn't watch the coverage. Instead, she returned home, made tea, and sat on her porch with her notebook open. Tonight's entry: names we didn't lose.
Luis,
Sarah, Marcus, Eli, Kayla, Jeremy, Marianne. Each name followed by a dash, and the name of someone who remembered them, because remembrance was rescue, just slower. Then one morning in July she received a call. From a shelter in Portland. A woman had walked in, mid-30s, disoriented, quiet. She'd seen a story in a magazine about Monroe, about Daniel, and she said 5 words. "I think I'm one of them." Her name was Naomi Fields, except it wasn't. Her birth name was Jenna Madsen. Vanished 1990, age 11, from a summer camp in Colorado. Presumed drowned. No search ordered. A staff member had confirmed her drowning, now known to be affiliated with Bright Range's predecessor. Jenna remembered nothing before 1991, but she had dreams, of tunnels, of names scratched into metal, and one recurring image, a tree with red leaves. Elaine flew to Portland, not to question her, not to validate her, but to listen. Jenna sat across from her at a picnic table outside the shelter. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes stayed low. But when Elaine showed her Daniel's drawing, Jenna stopped. Her hand reached for it like muscle memory. "I've seen this before," she whispered. "In a notebook. Boy had it. He told me he wouldn't forget." Elaine's breath caught. "Daniel?" Jenna nodded slowly. "I think he helped me get out." That night, Elaine returned home and added Jenna's name to the ledger. She didn't write her story yet, just her name. The rest would come later, with care, with time. Across the country, more survivors emerged. 3 in just 2 weeks. 2 remembered nothing. 1 remembered everything. A boy now grown, who escaped in 2002 and had never told anyone. Out of fear, shame, and the sense that no one would believe him, he heard about Monroe on a podcast. He emailed the task force with 1 sentence. "It happened to me too." Elaine added his name, then made a new section in her notebook. Voices that came back. It wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about return. Meanwhile, a class of seniors in Monroe prepared for graduation. The principal invited Elaine to speak. She stood before the students. 18 years old, bright-eyed, full of the same electricity Daniel once held. "You know the story of the class of '99, she began. "But I want to tell you what they became." She held up Daniel's drawing. "They became a signal, a light, a promise." She paused. And now it's yours to carry. After the ceremony, a girl handed her a folded card. Inside, a drawing, a red tree, a stick figure holding a hand. Beneath it, "We remember." Elaine folded it carefully, placed it beside Daniel's, and whispered, "So do I." August brought heat, and with it the final report from the Below Project Task Force. 1,000 pages long. Elaine received an early copy, delivered by hand. She didn't read it all at once. She turned pages slowly, pausing at every name, every confirmed case, every truth that had once been buried like Daniel's voice in the stone. 84 students, 13 chaperones, 5 known organizations, dozens of complicit contractors, years of silence, until one boy scratched the word below into a rusting bus frame and reminded the world what we forget at our own cost. The final section of the report contained survivor testimonies, redacted for privacy. Elaine read them anyway. One wrote, "I thought I was made up, like I wasn't real. But then I saw someone say Daniel's name on TV, and I knew I was real, and I wasn't alone." Another, "They told us we were abandoned, but we weren't. Someone was still looking." And another, "Every time I see a porch light, I think of home, of the version of me that got away." Elaine pressed the edge of Daniel's drawing to her lips. The stick figure boy, the red crayon roof, the word home. A month later, the Monroe Library unveiled a permanent exhibit. The Below Room, artifacts from the recovery, photographs of the students, scans of Daniel's notebook, a recording of Elaine's speech looping softly in the background, and at the center, under glass, the drawing, the one that started everything. Children walked through the exhibit holding their parents' hands. Teenagers stood longer than expected. Some cried, some didn't, but all of them read the names, and none of them left the room the same. That fall, Elaine stepped back. The wall was tended to by others now. The watch was wider. She still wrote letters, still added names to the ledger, but the work, the burden, no longer sat on her shoulders alone. She had built a lighthouse, and others were keeping it lit. One evening, sitting alone on the porch, she looked up. The red maple was taller than ever. The flags beneath it flapped softly in the breeze. She thought of Daniel, not of how he was lost, but of how he was found, and how he had led others back. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Elaine smiled. "You did it," she whispered, then added, with a quiet certainty that echoed deep into the dark, "We're all coming home now." Some stories don't end in triumph or tragedy. They end in return, not always of the body, but of the truth, of the name, of the voice that refused to disappear, even when buried deep below. Daniel Mercer was one of 21 students who vanished on a trip meant to celebrate their future. Instead, it became the moment their lives were stolen. Their identities scraped thin and traded like paper. But Daniel resisted. He wrote, he carved, he remembered, and in doing so he gave others a way home. He left behind a map, one made of scratches on steel, ink on torn paper, and the unshakable instinct to be known, to be found. Elaine followed that map, step by aching step, not with vengeance, but with faith. She turned grief into witness, witness into action, action into a movement that reached past Monroe, past the cave, past even the years she had lost. Because the truth doesn't vanish. It waits, in old files, in half-burned notes, in the flicker of a porch light left on just in case. Now that light burns brighter. For Daniel, for Luis, for Kayla, for Jenna, for every child who disappeared and every parent who waited. The silence has been broken, and in its place the world is listening again. So if you're reading this, and someone you love is still missing, don't put out the light. Don't turn away from the empty chair. Because stories like Daniel's have taught us, sometimes, they're still trying to come home. And now, we know how to find them.